Shalom, I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, and welcome to this edition of Revealing Prophecy. Each week we connect the dots of the news from around the globe with biblical prophecy and talk about what was, what is, and what is to come. The monologue is our original work, and all other articles are used giving credit to their respective sources. We invite you to visit ignitingnation.com for a full roster of daily interviews, and we encourage you to sign up for our newsletter and YouTube channel so you never have to miss out on any of the special offers and events. Here's a quick look at what we will be covering on today's show. I'll be giving you an opening monologue, then covering a story by Michael Oren, foreign ambassador to Israel, the coming Middle East conflagration, a story entitled Foreign Policy Experts Predict Iranian Attack on Israel, Just a Matter of Time by Israel Castnet, an analysis, Trump Does Know What He Is Doing in Syria by Carolyn Glick, Israel Watch Attack by Jim Fletcher, a second Cedar Revolution in Lebanon by Brent Nakdell, and final comments by myself. As we take a look at the Bible is a book of prophecy, and there are over 2,500 prophecies in the Bible, of which approximately 2,000 have been fulfilled. Given that the Bible proves so reliable a document, there's every reason to expect that the remaining 500 prophecies, those slated for the time of the end, also will be fulfilled to the last letter. Who can afford to ignore these coming events, much less miss out on the immeasurable blessings offered to anyone and everyone who submits to the control of the Bible's author, God Himself? Would a reasonable person take lightly God's warning of judgment for those who reject what they know to be true about Jesus and the Bible, or who reject Jesus' claim on their lives? It's the holiday season, as they call it. You know, Thanksgiving, Hanukkah, Christmas, New Year's, and a host of others. I'm sharing this with you because of the millions who are forgotten because they do not have either friends or family, or it's assumed that they have plans, or if they didn't, they would ask. Each year, the body of Messiah ignores, overlooks, and forgets about the ones who have struggled all year with depression, anxiety, addiction, loneliness, and feel marginalized. They have no sensitivity or compassion to the needs of those they have ignored all year. However, for so many, this is not the best time of the year. It's a reminder that they no longer matter and no one really cares. This may be the year they lost a loved one and it's fresh on their hearts, it's faded from your memory. This may be the year their child or children got married and they're not caught up in the odd year syndrome. Regardless, there are many who will spend from today until after New Year's feeling left out and alone. Anxiety prescriptions increase, as well as suicides. You'll hear these words, "Oh, don't worry about me. I have more plans and invitations than you can imagine." It only serves as a reminder to them that what may either bring up wretched memories or a feeling of loss, or just confirming to them their sense of loss and deep-seated sadness. When they look at your family and the joy you have, they're reminded that they either had that once and lost it, or sadly they may have never had that at all. Each year when I had a congregation, I held a memorial service for a very important person in our congregation. In fact, I don't think we could have survived their passing, but somehow, by the grace of God, another stepped in to fill their place. Each year we mourned the passing of somebody else. You know, that person that when you didn't want to do a job in the congregation, you said, "Hey, can't you get somebody else to do it?" It seems that our mainstream churches are dwindling and there's an epidemic decline in each at the death of their somebody else. I wonder what would happen if we decided this year we would fill that role. What if we as a family decided to take on all that money we were going to spend on food for the gluttonous consumption of too much? If we either donated that money or, I'm about to get radical here, woke up on Thursday morning at 4 a.m. and went and served at the local mission? And what if instead of indulging on the latest game or gadget, we actually together as a family wrapped gifts of blankets and soap and towels and toothbrushes and toothpaste and deodorant and woke up early on Christmas morning and took them and gave them out to those who, for whatever reason, are where they are and don't want to be there? What if every family called and visited one shut-in, one senior citizen who no longer gets any visitors, and brightened their day, and we gave up something we wanted so they could feel the love we so take for granted every day of our lives? What if your holiday really glorified God and fulfilled the calling of God that says, let your light so shine that man would see your good works and bring glory to your Father in heaven? I know I'm going to get 1,000 look at what I do on the holidays and look at me. I'd rather receive one message that says this is going to become our new tradition, and starting this year our children will see and experience the outpouring of God's love in those who do not have what we have. This is not a message of condemnation. This is a message of transformation. Each one of us can do something to change a life. If you can't afford to bring something, then go sing something. If you can't sing something, then go serve something. And if you can't serve something, then hug someone who may have not had a hug in years. What if instead of posting your look at all our conspicuous consumption and spending money that could have clothed an entire family, you posted a picture that represents the sacrifice God made for you? The sacrifice not so that you would have more, but that you would have more to give, more love, more compassion. What if this message was the beginning of a new dialogue in your home that set a new foundation of tradition? Whose job is it anyways? It's apparent the pastors are no longer willing to risk the filling of seats and the bragging rights to how many attend their congregation. It was never supposed to be the pastor's job for you to instill a call to serve one another. That was always your job. This season I challenge you to do it and to share on our Facebook page what you experienced by showing the love of God to someone else this year in a way that you have never shown it before. If true religion is taking care of the widows and orphans and serving one another, then let's chronicle that instead. What if we told our kids this year the only pictures we post are of the lives we touched outside of our family? No bragging or showing off, no more making someone else feel bad because they didn't get what you did. It's easy to say, remember the reason for the season. It's another to show others what this season is all about. Scripture tells us the grass withers and the flowers fade, but the word of the Lord will stand forever. This year, give the gift that stands forever. Be the word, live the word, and share the word, and you will have given the greatest gift of all. Our first story, the coming Middle East conflagration. The senior ministers of the Israeli government met twice last week to discuss the possibility of open war with Iran. They were mindful of the Iranian plan for a drone attack from Syria in August, aborted at the last minute by an Israeli airstrike, as well as Iran's need to deflect attention from the mass protest against Hezbollah's role in Lebanon. The ministers also reviewed the recent attack by Iranian drones and cruise missiles on 2 Saudi oil installations, reportedly concluding that a similar assault could be mounted against Israel from Iraq. The Israel Defense Forces, meanwhile, announced the adoption of an emergency plan, codenamed Momentum, to significantly expand Israel's missile defense capacity, its ability to gather intelligence on embedded enemy targets, and its soldiers' preparation for urban warfare. Israeli troops, especially in the north, have been placed on war footing. Israel is girding for the worst and acting on the assumption that fighting could break out at any time. And it's not hard to imagine how it might arrive. The conflagration, like so many in the Middle East, could be ignited by a single spark. Israeli fighter jets have already conducted hundreds of bombing raids against Iranian targets in Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq. Preferring to deter rather than embarrass Tehran, Israel rarely comments on such actions. But perhaps Israel miscalculates, hitting a particularly sensitive target, or perhaps politicians cannot resist taking credit. The result could be a counterstrike by Iran using cruise missiles that penetrates Israel's air defenses and smashes into targets like the Kiryat, the Tel Aviv's equivalent of the Pentagon. Israel would retaliate massively against Hezbollah's headquarters in Beirut, as well as dozens of its emplacements along the Lebanese border. And then, after a day of large-scale exchanges, the real war would begin. Rockets, many carrying tons of TNT, would rain on Israel. Drones armed with payloads would crash into crucial facilities, military and civilian. During the Second Lebanon War in 2006, the rate of such fire reached between 200 and 300 projectiles a day. Today, it might reach as high as 4,000. The majority of the weapons in Hezbollah's arsenal are standoff missiles with fixed trajectories that can be tracked and intercepted by Israel's Iron Dome system. But Iron Dome is 90% effective on average, meaning that for every 100 rockets, 10 get through, and the 7 operational batteries are incapable of covering the entire country. All of Israel, from Metula in the north to the southern port city of Eilat, would be in a range of enemy fire. But precision-guided missiles, growing numbers of which are in Iranian arsenals, pose a far deadlier threat. Directed by joysticks, many can imagine destinations mid-flight. The David Sling system, developed in conjunction with the United States, can stop them in theory because it's never been tested in combat. And each of its interceptors costs $1 million. Even if it's not physically raised, Israel can be bled economically. First, though, it would be paralyzed. If rockets fall near Ben Gurion Airport, as during Israel's 2014 war with Hamas in Gaza, it will close to international traffic. Israel's ports, through which a major portion of its food and essential supplies are imported, may also shut down, and its electrical grids could be severed. Iran has honed its hacking tools in recent years, and Israel, though a world leader in cyber defense, cannot entirely protect its vital utilities. Millions of Israelis would huddle in bomb shelters. Hundreds of thousands would be evacuated from border areas that terrorists are trying to infiltrate. The restaurants and hotels would empty, along with the offices of the high-tech companies of the startup nation. The hospitals, many of them resorting to underground facilities, would quickly be overwhelmed, even before the skies darken with the toxic fumes of blazing chemical factories and oil refineries. Israel would, of course, respond. Its planes and artillery would return fire, and the IDF would mobilize. More than twice the size of the French and British armies combined, at least on paper, the IDF can call up, equip, and deploy tens of thousands of seasoned reservists in less than 24 hours. But where would it send them? Most of the rockets would be launched from southern Lebanon, where the launchers are embedded in some 200 villages. Others would be fired from Gaza, where Hamas and Islamic Jihad, both backed by Iran, have at least 10,000 rockets. But longer-range missiles, including the deadly Shahab-3, would reach Israel from Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and Iran itself. This presents a daunting challenge to the Israeli Air Force, which does not possess strategic bombers capable of reaching Iran and must grapple with the advanced Russian anti-aircraft weapons situated in Syria. Israeli ground troops would be forced to move into Lebanon and Gaza, house to house, while special forces would be dispatched deep within Syria and Iraq. Israel's own conventional missiles could devastate Iranian targets. But even if these countermeasures could succeed in curtailing much of the missile fire, they would also inflict many thousands of civilian casualties. This is precisely what Iran wants. Its proxies preventing the fight of residents from combat areas in order to accuse Israel of committing war crimes. West Bank and Gaza, Palestinians, meanwhile, would likely stage violent protests that Israel would put down harshly, setting the stage for the Security Council to condemn Israel for employing indiscriminate and disproportional force, and for the United Nations Human Rights Council to gather evidence for the International Criminal Court. What Iran and its allies cannot accomplish on the battlefield, they can achieve through boycotts, isolating and strangling Israel. Does all of this seem a little far-fetched? Not to the senior Israeli government ministers who have been contemplating precisely these sorts of scenarios. And over all of them looms a pressing question: How will the United States respond? The question is paramount for multiple reasons, beginning with America's role in precipitating the potential for conflict. Whether inadvertently by diminishing its principal Sunni enemies, Saddam Hussein's Iraq, the Taliban, and the Islamic State, or purposefully by signing the nuclear deal, the United States has empowered Iran. While quick to oust Hosni Mubarak and Muammar Gaddafi, both Sunni, President Barack Obama refused to intercede against Iran's Syrian ally Bashar al-Assad. President Donald Trump failed to respond forcefully to the Iranian attacks on Saudi Arabia and on international shipping in the Gulf, or even for the downing of a U.S. Navy drone last June. Rather than a departure from long-standing policy, the hasty withdrawal of American troops from Syria appears to many in the Middle East as yet another American move that will strengthen Tehran. Few in the region will be surprised if the American president eases sanctions and negotiates with his Iranian counterpart. But along with turning a blind eye to Iranian aggression, the United States has also provoked it. Iran has exploited the profits and legitimacy of the nuclear deal to dominate great swaths of the Middle East and surround Israel with missiles. With the expiration of the treaty's sunset clauses, Iran could then break out, making hundreds of nuclear weapons while deterring Israeli preemption. But if that was the Iranian hope, its aspirations were destroyed overnight by President Trump's decision to pull out of the deal and reimpose sanctions. Faced with the collapsing economy, the regime had two painful options: either enter into talks with Trump under conditions the Iranians find humiliating, or else initiate hostilities first in Saudi Arabia and the Gulf, and if that fails, against Israel. Turning to action, the regime must hope will prove to the United States that without sanctions relief and a renewed nuclear treaty, Iran can plunge the entire region into chaos. Aware of these dangers, Israeli leaders nevertheless supported the undoing of a deal that they believe paved Iran's path to hegemony and a nuclear arsenal. They fully supported the sanctions even though they risked triggering a war. Better for it to face that risk now, they responded, than in 5 years after Iran has completed its Middle East conquest, encircled Israel, and acquired nuclear bombs. Better for conflict to occur during the current administration, which can be counted on to provide Israel with the three sources of American assistance it traditionally reserves in wartime. The first is ammunition. Beginning with the 1973 Yom Kippur War and continuing through 2 Lebanon wars and 3 major clashes with Gaza, Israel has run low on crucial munitions. In each case, the United States agreed to resupply the IDF either by airlift or from its pre-positioned stores inside Israel. Only once during the 2014 Protective Edge operation did the Obama administration delay shipments of arms, in that case Hellfire missiles, to express its displeasure over rising Palestinian casualties. The second kind of backing is legal. Because the UN reliably votes to condemn Israel, the United States has rallied like-minded states to oppose or at least soften one-sided resolutions and, in the Security Council, cast its veto. The United States has also acted to shield Israel from UN fact-finding missions that invariably denounce it and from sanctions imposed by international courts. When the Goldstone report, filed after the 2009 Cast-led operation in Gaza, accused Israel of crimes against humanity, both the Obama White House and the Democratic majority in Congress came to Israel's defense. Finally, the United States has supported Israel on the day after the fighting in negotiating ceasefires, troop withdrawals, and prisoner exchanges, and establishing frameworks for peace. The tradition began after the 1967 Six-Day War with the U.S. brokered Security Council Resolution 242 and continued through the shuttle diplomacy of Secretaries of State Henry Kissinger in 1973 and 74 and Condoleezza Rice in 2006. Only after the 2014 fighting did Israel reject America's offer of mediation due to its government's lack of faith in Secretary John Kerry. Such distrust is absent from Israel's relations with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and there's little doubt of this administration's willingness to supply the 3 traditional types of assistance. But what if Israel needs more than that? What if there were a situation in which the survival of the Jewish state were threatened? Would the United States intervene? The answer is yes, to a degree. Every 2 years, U.S. and Israeli forces hold joint exercises called Juniper Cobra to strengthen Israeli air defenses. After participating as an IDF reservist in the first Juniper Cobra in 1990, this author worked with my American counterparts to deploy Patriot missile batteries in Israel during the Gulf War. Since then, the cooperation has significantly expanded, including the stationing of an American manned X-band radar system in Israel and the temporary deployment of the THAAD system, employing some of America's most advanced anti-ballistic technology. Though the details remain top secret, the United States is clearly committed to helping protect Israeli skies. Whether American troops would go on the offensive on Israel's behalf, striking Iranian bases, remains uncertain. That ambiguity is only deepening in an election year in which the incumbent and his opponents are campaigning to end old Middle Eastern wars, not get bogged down in new ones. Polls taken after the president's decision to withdraw from Syria showed a lack of bipartisan support for even a small-scale American military involvement in the region. Yet administration officials have repeatedly assured me that Israel is not Syria or Saudi Arabia and that Israel can count on massive U.S. support if needed. I continue to believe that is true. I recall President Obama's commitment to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in the Oval Office 6 years ago this week on the last day of Michael Oren's service as Israeli ambassador. The United States will always come to Israel's aid in the event of a war, he said, because that is what the American people expect. But I also remember that back in 1973, Egypt and Syria saw a president preoccupied with an impeachment procedure and concluded that Israel was vulnerable. In the subsequent war, Israel prevailed, but at an excruciating price. The next war could prove even costlier. Our next story. Foreign policy experts predict Iranian attack on Israel just a matter of time by Israel Kaznet. As Iranians took to the streets this week to commemorate 40 years since the U.S. Embassy takeover in 1979, Iran announced new violations of the nuclear deal it signed in 2015. The rogue Islamist Republic admitted that it now operates 60 advanced IR-6 centrifuges and is working on a new type of centrifuge that will work 50 times faster than what is currently permitted under the deal. This announcement comes after Iran is engaged in attacks on oil tankers and Saudi oil facilities, shooting down an American drone, and of course its ongoing and aggressive efforts to build a war machine against Israel in Syria and elsewhere. For its part, on Monday, the U.S. Treasury Department announced new sanctions against 9 Iranian military commanders and officials. U.S. President Donald Trump withdrew from the nuclear deal with Iran in May 2018 and reimposed tough sanctions in an effort to curb the regime's destabilizing behavior in the Middle East and around the globe. Regardless, Tehran has continued to engage in destabilization efforts and heavily supports terror activity and weapons buildup in the Middle East. Yaakov Amador, a former national security advisor to Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and currently an analyst at the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security and a fellow at the Jewish Institute for National Security of America, told JNS that the Iranians want to remain far away from the Jewish state, but at the same time build a ring of fire around it. Iran supports Hezbollah in Lebanon, and the terror organization is estimated to have as many as 100,000 missiles. Iran is also trying hard to create an independent war machine in Syria, which Israel has been working to dismantle. According to foreign and some Israeli reports, Israel has struck 300 targets in Syria so far. According to Amador, Iran realized that Israel has been succeeding in Syria, so it began to build a branch of its independent war machine in Iraq, taking advantage of the fact that the Iraqis don't have total control of some parts of their land. For Iran, the idea is to have a military capability close to Israel, while it itself remains at a distance. An interesting question Amador said, is what should Israel's reaction be in such a situation? We know the head of the snake is in Iran. Will Israel go after targets in Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, or Yemen, or will we go directly to the head of the snake? Iran has the capability to attack Israel from multiple locations, including Lebanon and Syria, and now Iraq and possibly Yemen, as Netanyahu mentioned recently. This will be complicated. Eitan Gilboa, professor and director of the Center for the International Communication at Bar Ilan University in Ramat Gan, and a senior research associate at the Besa Center for Strategic Studies, told JNS that a number of elements have changed recently that impact Israel's preparedness and decision-making. First, Iran attacked the Saudi oil fields. Second, the United States withdrew from Syria. And third, Iranian provocations in the Persian Gulf were not met with any aggressive American answer. We also saw the Islamic Jihad in Gaza on orders from Iran trying to sabotage and undermine the situation there, he said. Like Amador, Gilboa noted that Israel has been trying to prevent Iran from building another front in Syria, saying this strategy has been extended to Iraq. He laid out the current state of affairs from Israel's perspective. According to Gilboa, it is obvious for all kinds of reasons that Iran would not attack Israel directly from its own territory. Iran lost some of the surprise that could have been inflicted on Israel had it not used cruise missiles against Saudi Arabia. Israel is preparing adequate answers to this kind of threat, as it expects Iran to attack it with precision-guided cruise missiles and drones. Gilboa suggested that the component of Israel's strategy must first be reveal Iran's plans. Then Israel must threaten direct and severe retaliation. Finally, Israel must make it clear that Syria and Lebanon will pay the price if attacks on Israel originate on their soil. If Iran orders Nasrallah to attack Israel, this will be complicated, said Gilboa. In the 2006 Second Lebanon War, Israel distinguished between the Lebanese army and Hezbollah. This is no longer the case. If Lebanon comes under attack, it will attack Lebanon, including Hezbollah. The same is true for Syria. Israel is trying to persuade Syrian President Bashar al-Assad and Russia that if Israel comes under attack from Syria, it is Assad who will pay the price. Additionally, continued Gilboa, Israel must inform Russia of potential Israeli action after an attack by Iran. These exchanges of fire between Israel and Iranian attempts to build a base in Syria is completely not in Russia's interest, and this is why Russia is not protesting Israeli military actions in Syria, he said. Israel should work to procure an American statement of support and must coordinate with the United States to announce that attacks on Israel will trigger American action. On the face of it, Gilboa said, these components should create some level of deterrence. Israel's main strategy is to create deterrence or at least limit any potential Iranian attack. If Iran does indeed attack, there will have to be a massive retaliation against Iranian interests. According to Gilboa, Europe should not be expected to join in the fight against Iran's hegemonic ambitions and support of global terrorism. They are stupid and deaf, he charged, and only trying to appease Iran. Both Amador and Gilboa agree that Iran is certainly bent on Israel in its crosshairs. Confrontation between Iran and Israel is unavoidable, said Gilboa. There is great probability for some Iranian military action. This is something Israel is preparing for. Our assumption, said Amador, is not a question of if, but when. Our next story, analysis. Trump does know what he's doing in Syria, contributed by Carolyn Glick. U.S. President Donald Trump's many critics insist that he has no idea what he's doing in Syria. The assassination of Islamic State leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi last weekend by U.S. Special Forces showed this criticism as misplaced. Trump has a very good idea of what he's doing in Syria, not only regarding ISIS, but regarding the diverse competing actors on the ground. Regarding ISIS, the obvious lesson of the al-Baghdadi raid is that Trump's critics claim that his withdrawal of U.S. forces from Syria's borders with Turkey meant that he was going to allow ISIS to regenerate was utterly baseless. The raid did more than that. Al-Baghdadi's assassination and Trump's discussion of the mass murderer's death showed that Trump had not merely maintained faith with the fight against ISIS and its allied jihadist groups. he has fundamentally changed the U.S. terror fighting doctrine, particularly as it relates to psychological warfare against jihadists. Following the September 11th attacks, the Bush administration initiated a public diplomacy campaign in the Arab Islamic world. Rather than attack and undermine the jihadist doctrine that insists that it is the religious duty of Muslims to conquer the non-Muslim world and establish a global Islamic empire or caliphate, the Bush strategy was to ignore the jihad in the hopes of appeasing its adherents. The basic line of the Bush administration's public diplomacy campaign was to embrace the mantra that Islam is peace and assert that the United States loves Islam because the United States seeks peace. Along these lines, in 2005, then Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice prohibited the State Department, FBI, and U.S. intelligence agencies from using controversial terms like radical Islam and jihad in official documents. The Obama administration took the Bush administration's obsequious approach to strategic communications several steps further. President Barack Obama and his advisors went out of their way to express sympathy for the Islamic world. The Obama administration supported the jihadist Muslim Brotherhood against Egypt's long-serving president and U.S. ally Hosni Mubarak, and backed Mubarak's overthrow with the full knowledge that the only power forceful enough to replace him was the Muslim Brotherhood. As for the Shiite jihadists, Obama's refusal to support the pro-democracy protesters in Iran, attempted green revolution in 2009, placed the United States firmly on the side of the jihadist, imperialist regime of the Ayatollahs and against the Iranian people. In short, Obama took Bush's rhetoric of appeasement and turned it into America's actual policy. The Bush-Obama sycophancy won the United States no goodwill. Al-Qaeda, which led the insurgency against U.S. forces in Iraq with Iranian and Syrian support, was not moved to diminish its aggression and hatred of the United States due to the administration's efforts. It was during the Obama years that ISIS built its caliphate on a third of the Iraqi-Syria landmass, opened slave markets, and launched a mass campaign of filmed beheadings in the name of Islam. In his announcement of al-Baghdadi's death on Sunday, Trump unceremoniously abandoned his predecessor's strategy of sucking up to the jihadists. Unlike Obama, who went to great lengths to talk about the respect U.S. forces who killed Osama bin Laden accorded the terrorist mass murderer's body in accordance with Islamic practice, Trump mocked al-Baghdadi, the murdering, raping, slaving caliph. Al-Baghdadi, Trump said, died like a dog, like a coward. Al-Baghdadi died, Trump said, whimpering and crying. Trump posted a picture of his Twitter page of the Delta Force combat dog who brought down about al-Baghdadi's death by chasing him into a tunnel under his compound and provoking him to set off the explosive belt he was wearing and kill himself and the two children who were with him. Trump later described the animal who killed Allah's self-appointed resident on earth as our canine, as they call it. I call it a dog, a beautiful dog, a talented dog. Obama administrations angrily condemned Trump's remarks. For instance, former CIA Deputy Mike Morrell said he was bothered by Trump's locker room talk, which he said inspires other people to conduct revenge attacks. His colleague, former Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, retired Admiral James Winfield, said that Trump's piling on, describing al-Baghdadi as a dog, sent a signal to his followers that caused them to lash out possibly more harshly in the wake. These criticisms are ridiculous. ISIS terrorists have richly proven they require no provocation to commit mass murder. They only need the opportunity. Moreover, Trump's constant use of the term dog and employment of canine imagery is highly significant. Dogs are considered unclean in Islam. In Islamic society, dog is the worst name you can call a person. It's hard to imagine that al-Baghdadi's death at the paws of a dog is likely to rally many Muslims to his side. To the contrary, it's likely instead to demoralize his followers. What's the point of joining a group of losers who believe in a fake prophet who died like a coward by chased by a beautiful dog, a talented dog? Well, then there's Russia. Trump's critics insist that his decision to abandon the U.S. position along the Syrian border with Turkey effectively surrendered total control over Syria to Russia. But that's far from the case. The American presence along the border didn't harm Russia. It helped Russia. It freed Russian President Vladimir Putin from having to deal with Turkey. Now that Americans have left the border zone, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is Putin's problem. And he's not the main problem that Trump has made for Putin in Syria. Putin's biggest problem in Syria is financial. The Russian economy has sunk in a deep recession due to the drop in global oil prices. Putin had planned to finance a Syrian operation with Syrian oil revenues. To this end, in January 2018, he signed an agreement with Syrian President Bashar al-Assad that effectively transferred the rights to Syrian oil to Russia. But Putin hadn't taken Trump into consideration. U.S. forces did not withdraw from all of their positions in Syria last month. They maintained their control over Al Tanf Air Base, which controls the Syrian border with Jordan and Iraq. More importantly, from Russia's perspective, the United States has not relinquished its military presence adjacent to Syria's oil facilities in Deir el-Zor province on the eastern side of the Euphrates River. Indeed, according to media reports, the United States is reinforcing its troop strength in Deir el-Zor to ensure continued U.S. Kurdish control over Syria's oil fields. To understand how high a priority control over Syria's oil installation is for Putin, it's worth recalling what happened in February 2018. On February 7, 2018, a month after Putin and Assad signed their oil agreement, a massive joint force comprising Russian mercenaries, Syrian commandos, and Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard forces crossed the Euphrates River with the aim of seizing the town of Kusham adjacent to the Conoco oil fields. Facing them were 40 U.S. Special Forces deployed with Kurdish and Arab Syrian Democratic Forces troops. The U.S. forces directed a massive air assault against the attacking forces, which killed some 500 soldiers and ended the assaults. Accounts regarding the number of Russian mercenaries killed started at 80 and rise to several hundred. The American counterattack caused grievous harm to the Russian force in Syria. Putin has kept the number of Russian military forces in Syria low by outsourcing much of the fighting to Russian military contractors. The aim of the failed operation was to enable those mercenary forces to seize the means to finance their own operation and get them off the Kremlin payroll. Since then, Putin has tried to dislodge the U.S. forces from Kusham at least one more time, only to be met with a massive demonstration of force. The continued U.S. Kurdish control over Syrian oil fields and installation requires Putin to continue directly funding his war in Syria. So long as this remains the case, given Russian financial constraints, Putin is likely to go to great lengths to restrain his Iranian, Syrian, and Hezbollah partners and their aggressive designs against Israel in order to prevent a costly war. In other words, by preventing Russia from seizing Syria's oil fields, Trump is forcing Russia to behave in a manner that protects American interests in Syria. The focus of most of the criticism against Trump's Syria policies has been alleged abandonment of the Syrian Kurds to the mercies of their Turkish enemies. But over the past week, we learned that this is not the case. As Trump explained, continued U.S. Kurdish control over Syria's oil fields provides the Kurdish-controlled SDF with the financial and military wherewithal to support and defend its people and their operations. Moreover, details of al-Baghdadi's assassination point to continued close cooperation between U.S. and Kurdish forces. According to accounts of the raid, the Kurds provided the Americans with key intelligence that enabled U.S. forces to pinpoint al-Baghdadi's location. As to Turkey, both al-Baghdadi and ISIS spokesman Abu Hassan al-Major, who was killed by U.S. forces on Tuesday, were located in areas in eastern Syria controlled by Turkey. The Americans didn't try to hide this fact. The Turkish operation in eastern Syria is reporting raising Erdogan's popularity at home, but it's far from clear that the benefit he receives from his actions will be long-lasting. Turkey's The Turkish operation is reporting raising Erdogan's popularity at home. Far from clear that the benefits he received will be long-lasting. Turkey's Syria operation is exposing the NATO members' close ties to ISIS and its allied terror groups. This exposure in and of itself is making the case for downgrading U.S. strategic ties with its erstwhile ally. Even worse for Turkey, due to Trump's public embrace of Erdogan, the Democrats are targeting the Turkish autocrat as enemy number one. On Tuesday, with the support of Republican lawmakers who have long recognized Erdogan's animosity to U.S. interests and allies, the Democratic-led House overwhelmingly passed a comprehensive sanctions resolution against Turkey. The al-Baghdadi assassination and related events demonstrate that Trump is not flying blind in Syria. He's implementing a multifaceted set of policies that are based on the strengths, weaknesses, and priorities of the various actors on the ground in ways that advance U.S. interests at the expense of its foes and the benefits of its allies. Our next story, Israel's Watch Attack by Jim Fletcher. Iran has been flexing its muscle in the Middle East for a long time. Now the Islamic stronghold is downright pumping iron. In their zeal to get rid of Israel, the mullahs are allowing the military to talk a good game, and Israel is taking notice. In a report this week from Breitbart, Israel's military has a multi-tiered network of integrated air defense systems on alert for any attack of Iran missiles. Israeli Air Force Chief Amikon Norkin confirmed on Wednesday. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said earlier this month, Iran intends to attack Israel, and any attack which emanates from Yemen complicates the IDF's response, as its intermediate and long-range air defenses are better positioned to shoot down incoming attacks from Israel's north rather than from the south. Even as we speak, Arrow, Patriot, David Sling, and Iron Dome batteries are on alert, Norton said Wednesday night at a graduation ceremony for air defense officers. Attack drones and cruise missiles are now also part of the mix. Lebanon's Hezbollah terrorists have also been stockpiling rockets for more than 10 years. Recently, Iran's Revolutionary Guard commander, Major General Hassani Salami, said that wiping out Israel is now an achievable goal. What we must keep in mind, though, is that Israel's defensive capabilities are multi-layered, and there is another factor. Israel's defensive capabilities are enhanced by her offensive capabilities. I am confident, no, I am certain, Israel will meet any challenge. In fact, if Iran poses an existential threat to Israel, the mullahs will cease to exist. One can also hope that as time goes on, young people in these countries will revolt. That's happening in Lebanon, where the country's billionaires have more than 99% of the country. Added to this misery is a proxy war between supporters of Iran and Saudi Arabia. Iran's mischief is curtailed somewhat by U.S. sanctions, which impact the trouble Hezbollah can make. As we follow closely the military threats to Israel in the region, let's let things play out and not despair. Pray hard for Israel and pray hard for the return of the Lord. Israel will be okay. God has promised. Our next story, a second Cedar Revolution in Lebanon by Brent Nagtigal. This week saw the continuation of an anti-government protest in Lebanon. These are the largest protests in the past 15 years. Back then, those protests led to the Cedar Revolution, which successfully removed Syrian influence from Lebanon. However, as fate would have it, the time since that revolution has seen Syria replaced by Iran. Iran became the dominant outside factor in Lebanon, through the use of its proxy, Hezbollah. These current protests, which are more generally against selfish government policy, poor living conditions, and proposed tax hikes, also have Hezbollah worried that its grip on power might be weakening. The protesters are calling for the whole political system to be overthrown, and that includes Hezbollah. It's possible we are on the verge of a second Cedar Revolution in Lebanon, one that would remove Iran's grip on the nation. Hezbollah's leader, Hassan Nasrallah, said on Friday that he did not want the government to resign, one of the demands of the protesters. He also said that civil war might be the result if the protests continue. Nevertheless, on Tuesday this week, the Saudi-backed Prime Minister said Saad Hariri resigned from his post in an affront to Hezbollah's wishes. But even his resignation wasn't enough to stop the protesters. They are still on the streets. continue to watch this situation in Lebanon. After years of planning, Hezbollah has finally become the dominant power in Lebanon. These protests threaten that role. Hezbollah members were filmed storming the protest tents in Beirut on Tuesday, hurting some of the demonstrators. The next day, seemingly undeterred by Hezbollah's strong-arm tactics, the protesters were back to set up their tents. Hezbollah won't go quietly into the night, and neither will the protesters. This means this situation won't go away quickly. At the trumpet, we fully expect Iran's sway over Lebanon through Hezbollah to end. We base this forecast on the Bible and specifically prophecy found in Psalm 83. These escalating protests could lead to the fulfillment of that forecast. Please read Why You Need to Watch Lebanon by Trumpet Editor-in-Chief Gerald Flurry. Baghdadi killed, but the real terrorist threat remains. The world's most wanted terrorist is dead. On Sunday morning, United States Army Delta Force commandos with 8 attack helicopters conducted a raid against an Islamic State compound in Syria. At least 9 Islamic State members were killed, one being founder and leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. U.S. President Donald Trump said on Sunday, Baghdadi's demise demonstrates America's relentless pursuit of terrorist leaders and our commitment to the enduring and total defeat of ISIS and other terror organizations. While the death of Baghdadi is a victory for the United States and the world, it's easy to get carried away with its significance. As we've often stated, the Islamic State is merely a distraction from the real terrorist threat in the Middle East, the Islamic State of Iran. The U.S. clearly sees the threat posed by Iran, but instead of going after the source, it chases the distractions. Various terrorist groups within Iran's proxy network and others, such as the Islamic State. As Mr. Flurry wrote in The King of the South, the only way to win such a war is to deal with the main source of terrorism or cut off the head of the terrorist snake. Clearly, this has not happened, and it won't at the hands of the United States. For more on the biblically prophesied rise of the terrorist regime in Iran and who would eventually cause its downfall, please request Gerald Flurry's free booklet, The King of the South, 102nd anniversary of the Battle of Beersheba. The Battle of Beersheba was hugely significant in the eventual establishment of the Jewish state. During World War I, Beersheba was heavily fortified with Turkish artillery and lines of trenches to push back any normal military assault, and it had done so through most of the day portion of October 31st. So the decision was made an hour or so before sunset to charge the Turkish line using 800 Australian light horse soldiers. The brazen attack meant that the horsemen would be under constant fire for 2 kilometers in an open field as they galloped toward Beersheba at top speed. Nevertheless, the troops charged forward directly into artillery and machine gun fire. As they approached the Turkish line, they dismounted and used their bayoneted swords to take on the entrenched Turkish soldiers. Stunningly, it took less than an hour for the Australia and New Zealand Army Corps to take Beersheba. And even more astounding was that only 30 horsemen were killed, another 36 wounded. The Turks didn't fare so well, losing more than 500 men, with another 1,500 surrendering. The event would go down in history as the last successful cavalry charge in warfare. And simply looking at the ratio of deaths, this could be classified as a modern-day miracle. Soon thereafter, the British offensive stormed up Palestine, took Jerusalem, and allowed for the future establishment of the Jewish state. My closing comments. Today, our tickets were issued by Lufthansa Airlines for our March trip to Israel, and then down to Eilat and Petra across the Jordanian border. The stories you just heard all predicted there will be some form of conflict going on in Israel between Iran and possibly Lebanon, Syria, Turkey, Russia, and any number of other players wanting to annihilate the Jewish state. According to God's word, there will one day be a conflict of biblical proportion, fulfilling the prophecy of God through Ezekiel in chapters 38 and 39, and a further description of Armageddon in the book of Revelation. I am sure you are asking yourself, are you and the 49 others traveling with you crazy, or do they just walk by faith and not by sight and trust the word of God? No one knows the day or the hour of a lot of things yet to come. But Matthew 6 is really quite clear. Therefore I say to you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will put on. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air, for they neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not of more value than they? Which of you by worrying can add 1 cubit to his stature? So why do you worry about clothing? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. And yet I say to you that even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. Now if God so clothes the grass of the field, which today is and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, will he not much more clothe you, O you of little faith? Therefore do not worry, saying, what shall we eat, what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? For all of these things the Gentiles seek, for your heavenly Father knows that you need all these things. But seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added to you. Therefore do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about its own things. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble. And to that I say, amen and amen. I always advise you to buy travel insurance, and that's because I am not God, and I do not know when it will happen, but I do know what will happen. I am so confident in God's sovereignty and in his covenant with Israel that we have already sold 1/3 of the seats on the 2021 trip to Israel, May 20th to May 30th, 2021. You can find the registration form and itinerary at ignitinganation.com/events. I want to personally invite you to join me and walk the land of the book and meet the people of the book and walk where our Messiah walked. God said, fear not, and I am not afraid. Join us in the land, and your life will be changed forever. And that, my friend, is this week's edition of Revealing Prophecy. This program, along with Revealing the Bible, are only available after they air through the Biblical Truth Library. I want to encourage you to visit ignitinganation.com and sign up for our weekly newsletter. Check out the Biblical Truth Library and all our teachings. Follow us online through Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you can catch up on over 1,400 interviews and never miss any of our great guests. Your comments and questions are always welcome, and we may include your answer in the next edition of the newsletter. Don't forget our regular live broadcast from Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Time. Until we see you right back here tomorrow for the next edition of Revealing the Truth, we thank you for watching and bid you shalom.